Welcome to this special episode of the Evo India podcast. This on everything that you want to know about CNG cars. Now, as you've seen from all the content that we've been putting out, we are big fans of alternate fuel vehicles. Whether it's petrol, diesel, electric or hybrid, as long as the car delivers on the thrill of driving, we are all for it. And we've created a whole bunch of content on all kinds of cars. But strangely, we've forgotten about CNG. We've hardly got any content on CNG cars, and that changes today. Now, before we filmed this podcast, we put out a post on social media asking you guys, our viewers, for your questions on CNG cars. Myths, doubts, anything that's a hurdle in you buying a CNG car, let us know, and that is what we are addressing on this podcast. And because this podcast will be dropping at around the same time as the Tata Altroz CNG goes on sale, we are using shots of that car that we filmed at the Auto Expo. Now, if you recall, one of the big talking points of the Altroz CNG, stuff that we hadn't seen on other CNG cars here in India, is that twin cylinder setup. What that does is it addresses the biggest pain point of I think most CNG car owners, and that is that big CNG tank in the boot that eats into all the boot space. That has been addressed in the Tata Altroz CNG. So anyway, that's one of the topics that we'll be addressing on this podcast. And before we go ahead, a friendly reminder to subscribe to the Evo India channel. Hit that bell icon because we have a lot of videos that are coming up. First drives, first rides, comparisons, big features, and also podcasts such as these. And now let's dive into your questions. I got all of them on the iPad here, and the top of those questions, the one that most of you guys have been asking, is the running cost of CNG versus petrol. Now, obviously, that is going to be the main reason why you buy a CNG car. So we've done our research, and on average, a CNG car costs around 2.5 rupees per kilometer. That's the running cost. And how does that compare with petrol cars? So a similarly sized petrol car would cost you around 6.5 rupees per kilometer. So you're looking at a saving of around 4 rupees per kilometer with CNG, which is a fair saving. There are other questions as to when you're going to recover your initial investment in a CNG car. That is all coming up later on in this podcast. Question 2. The cost of CNG. And obviously, you know that the CNG costs have been fluctuating. Recently, prices in Maharashtra at least were dropped by around 5 to 6 rupees. So it's going up and down, but now the trend is more or less going downwards. And on average, the cost of CNG per kilo, that's how CNG is measured, not liters, but kilos. The cost of CNG per kilo is between 73 to 90 rupees around India. So it varies across different parts of India, but between 73 and 90 rupees a kilo. The next question, availability of CNG. Now, we've all seen those huge lines outside petrol pumps of cars, CNG cars waiting to be tanked up. But if you actually look back, when was the last time you saw that line? In fact, I don't remember the last time I saw that big line outside a CNG filling station. And that obviously means that that is being addressed. There are more CNG stations that are opening up. So on average, there has been a rapid increase of CNG pumps across major cities in India. And there are now over 5,000 CNG pumps in India. And that number is only going to increase. The government is pushing CNG. So obviously that is going to keep pace with the government's push towards more adoption of CNG vehicles. And of course, buyers will want it. If you're saving 4 rupees per kilometer with CNG, obviously buyers will want CNG cars. So that old myth about long lines outside CNG filling stations, I think that's a thing of the past. Though this is also interesting, and the next content piece will probably be a long drive with a CNG car to see what sort of availability of CNG pumps are there across India. How long does it take to fill CNG? So we will address that in another content piece where we actually hit the road and drive a CNG car. So stay tuned for that. The next question, how long does it take to fill a CNG vehicle? Now, we've seen this. The last time that I tested the Tiago CNG, when we went to fill up, it actually took the same amount of time as if you were going to fill petrol or diesel. And the big difference that I want to point out is that unlike those Olas and Ubers that you see with the bonnet open and they're filling the CNG from the bonnet, or maybe the boot, here you open the fuel filler lid and the entry is out there. So you don't have to open the bonnet or all of that. Nothing. You can sit inside the car, just open the fuel lid remotely and and you will be tanked up with CNG. So that is another advancement that cars like these are pushing through. Now, this is a big question. The boot space, how do you address that boot space issue? Now, a lot of us would have taken a CNG-equipped cab from the airport, and without any boot space, you have to keep your bags on the front seat or next to you. Now, that is being addressed on that Altroz CNG. So, the twin-cylinder setup that I talked about at the very start of this podcast, what that does is that sits in the space that was normally occupied by the spare wheel. So, it does eat a little bit into the boot space, but not so much. So, you still are left with a properish boot. So you can still put like an overnight bag. There is still space for it. It's not like the entire boot is filled up with that ungainly one big white cylinder of CNG. We also looked up our notes from the Auto Expo, and the Altroz, it has a boot space of 345 liters, the petrol Altroz, and the CNG version with the twin cylinder setup is expected to have a little bit more than 200 liters. So you still have a reasonably good boot with this Altroz CNG that is going to be launched very soon. The next question is on the capacity of CNG tanks and what range can one expect to get from CNG. So let's stick with the same Altroz example that we've been quoting. I look back at my notes from the expo. Each of those tanks is 30 liters, so 30 plus 30, so that's a total of 60 liters. 60 liters translates to approximately 9 kilos of CNG. Now, we don't have any figures of the Altroz CNG because we haven't driven it, but we got figures from the Tiago CNG. The Tiago CNG does approximately 27 kilometers per kilo. And then if you multiply that by 9 kilograms, you get a range of approximately 250 kilometers. Now, that's for the Tiago, but that's the kind of approximate range that you are looking at from these modern CNG cars. We have another question to elaborate on: can you start the car on CNG? Well, actually, no. Up until now, you could not start the car on CNG. You have to start it on petrol and then remember to switch over to CNG. But Tata Motors with the Tiago, the Tigor, and then also with the Altroz that is coming up, they have this industry first mode where you can actually start the car on CNG. The iCNG, as Tata Motors calls their CNG vehicles, they have a direct start in CNG. So you don't have to worry about starting off in petrol, then remembering to switch over to CNG. And if you don't switch over to CNG, then you're going to the 6.5 kilometers per liter running cost of petrol. So all of that hassle is not there. You can start the car on CNG and take off. So that is an industry first, and I think it's only available on Tata Motors vehicles as of now. Power output. Obviously, you guys, fans of Evo India, Thrill of Driving fans, you obviously want to know the power output. On average, CNG, it has a 15% power drop compared to regular petrol. So say looking at the Altroz, you should be getting around 74 to 75 bhp. We don't know the final figures. We'll only know that when that car is launched, but that's the kind of power that you are looking at. Now, the next one is an interesting question, and this is something that even we did not know. So we are asked this question that CNG cars are generally not offered in the top variants and lack all the top-end features like the fully loaded infotainment. And why is that? And honestly, we thought that this was not true, because why would a manufacturer not give a fully loaded variant, especially if customers want it? But actually, that is fact. Most of the CNG cars that you get, you can't get in the fully loaded variants. In fact, a lot of them don't even offer you all the colors that is offered with the petrol variant. So that is strange. But Tata Motors, and that's what they announced at the Auto Expo, with the Altroz CNG, it will be offered in the top of the line variant. So even if you want CNG, that doesn't mean that you need to compromise on features. You don't need to compromise on a lower grade of infotainment or smaller wheels or no alloy wheels or a lack of paint color. So all of that will be offered with the Altroz iCNG. You will get the fully loaded version. So that is a good thing. And of course, as we all know, the Altroz is the full 5-star global NCAP rated car. So a properly safe car. And that brings us to the next question. How safe are CNG cars? Well, a CNG car is as safe or otherwise as the equivalent petrol car. So if that car has been tested by global NCAP, that's the best way to rate safety. So the Tiago, 4 stars. The Altroz, full 5 stars. The safest hatchback that you can buy in the country. So the Altroz CNG also will be extremely safe, full 5 stars. The Altroz CNG, it also gets more safety features like thermal incident protection, gas leak detection feature, a micro switch to keep the car switched off at times of refueling, and also a fire protection device. The next question also relates to performance, but it's more specific. And specifically, what's the drivability difference between CNG and petrol? Now, we told you about the performance, it drops by around 15%. But the drivability at low revs especially, it doesn't change all that much. We saw this with the Tiago CNG. The difference at low RPMs was hardly noticeable, and I expect it to be the same with the Altroz CNG. Also, we should note that the tanks, because they're positioned low down in that spare wheel well, so you get a lower center of gravity, so better handling, better road holding. And also, another point I should have made earlier is that single ECU that the Altroz will get. So what's the benefit of that? That means that the switchover between petrol and CNG is seamless. You will not find that sudden drop in power. You will not find a jerk that you find in other CNG vehicles that you've noticed. Everybody has noticed it while sitting in a CNG car when it runs out of CNG, or when you're switching from petrol to CNG. There is that jerk, but that will not be there on the Altroz CNG. So the drivability, the overall refinement will obviously be very good. Yeah, actually, that's interesting because the next question is on refinement. What's the difference in the refinements between petrol and CNG? Honestly, zero. There is no difference. So in terms of the noise, NVH, noise, vibration, harshness, is the same as petrol. So that's absolutely the same. How much more do you pay for CNG over petrol, and when do you recoup that cost? Now, there are a lot of CNG cars available in the market, but on average, you spend around 1 lakh rupees more for CNG over petrol. And how long will you take to recoup that? Approximately 25,000 kilometers. After that, it's all saving. So until 25,000, you are then recouping the difference between petrol and CNG, but after that, it's all saving all the way through. Carrying on with the total cost of ownership questions, there's another one on the service costs. Are there any difference between CNG and petrol? Well, actually, no difference. CNG and petrol cars, the same service cost. And in fact, since we've been using the Altroz CNG as an example, I should point out that the Altroz CNG also gets the same warranty as the petrol, 3 years and 100,000 kilometers. How do you calculate operating costs of CNG? Like KMPL, what is the CNG equivalent? For CNG, it is kilometers per kilo, km per kg. How much does the weight of the car increase when equipped with CNG powertrain? Approximately 60 kilos, so that's the weight of the tanks and the other paraphernalia, so around 60 kilos more than the equivalent petrol-only car. Why should I buy a factory-fitted CNG vehicle and not do aftermarket and save a bit of cash? Now, this we have to stress. It is far safer when you buy a factory-fitted CNG vehicle rather than going afterwards and getting an aftermarket part fitted on. That is completely not advisable. So for safety, just buy a factory-fitted CNG car. You get the full warranty. If you go outside and put a CNG kit on it, your warranty is also void. So it's far better for the safety issue to just buy a factory-fitted CNG car. Are CNG cars popular in India? Well, obviously they are popular. We did our research and actually there are more than 1 million CNG cars on the road in India. So CNG is popular and it is only getting more and more popular. And the final question, how many CNG cars are there on the road today? Well, there are a lot of CNG cars on the road, but you can't visually make out the difference between a CNG and a petrol or a diesel car. Apart from that small sticker on the windscreen, they all look the same. But we did our research and turns out there are over 1 million CNG cars on the road today, and that number can only go up. In fact, thanks to you and your questions, we've finally done our research into CNG, and it does make a lot of sense, especially with this new generation of CNG cars that are coming up that don't have the compromises that were earlier associated with CNG. So they still have a usable boot. You can buy it in the top of the line variant, so you don't have to compromise on features. And if running costs are a priority for you, CNG, it does make a lot of sense. And that's it for our podcast on everything that you want to know about CNG. And of course, if you have any more questions, if we've missed out on addressing any questions, drop it in the comments and the team and I will get cracking on it. In fact, if we don't know some of the answers, we will ask industry experts, but we will reply to each and every one of your questions and we will address them. So thank you guys for watching this episode of the Evo India podcast. And as always, if you have any more suggestions for us as to what we should feature on the podcast, let us know in the comments and we will get cracking on it. Thank you guys for watching and tuning in.